Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 9. Tally ended up being late for class, but even as Major Klein had yelled at her in front of the whole class, and even as Abigail glared daggers into her back, because apparently even the knowledge of a secret girlfriend did nothing to inspire any forgiveness for being late, Tally couldn't quite bring herself to care. Her mind kept drifting back to the way Sarah's lips had felt on hers, to how Sarah hadn't hesitated to reciprocate when Tally had kissed her, and she found herself struggling to keep a smile from slipping onto her face at random times throughout class. When it was over, Raelle made a beeline for her, pressing up against Tally's side as they walked out of the room. "Where were you before class, Tal?" she asked, a smile threatening to break out on her face. "With your secret girlfriend, maybe?" "Okay, you say that any louder and it's not gonna be a secret anymore," Tally hissed back. "Is that a yes?" Raelle practically squealed. Tally tried to roll her eyes at Raelle's antics, but she found herself thinking about Sarah again, and she felt a blush rise on her cheeks. "I'm taking that as a yes," Raelle laughed, putting her arm around Tally and squeezing. "Can I guess who it is?" "No." "Can you tell me what she looks like?" "No." "Can you tell me anything?" Tally stopped in the middle of the hallway, students leaving the room parting around them. She considered Raelle's question. Was there anything she could tell Raelle? Anything that wouldn't give a hint to Sarah? She felt Raelle's eyes watching her eagerly, and couldn't stop the grin that broke out on her face. "She's a really good kisser." Raelle's laughter could be heard down the hallway. Sarah was a good kisser, almost too good of a kisser, Tally thought, if such a thing were even possible. Granted, Sarah was only the second person that Tally had ever kissed in her life, the first being Garrett. But if Tally had to compare the two, well, it was almost unfair to Garrett. Sarah always kissed her with a purpose, full lips always humming against her own. Whether it was a quick kiss as a hello or goodbye, or a longer, more intense kiss that left Tally breathless and wanting more. Kissing Sarah quickly became one of Tally's favorite things, one that Sarah herself was always eager to grant her. The chess games were quickly replaced by the time spent on either of the couches in front of the roaring fireplace, wrapped up in each other's arms. Sometimes they napped, both of them sleeping, with Sarah cradling Tally close to her chest. Sometimes it was just Tally that napped, her body stretched out on top of Sarah's, head resting on Sarah's chest, as Sarah would lie there, content to just run her hand through Tally's soft hair. Sometimes they would talk, Tally's head in Sarah's lap, as she would tell Sarah about her day, her classes, the funny and stupid things that her friends got up to, and in return, Sarah would answer more questions that Tally had about the past. Other days, though, like today, they would kiss. Granted, they always kissed, Telly always eager to feel Sarah's lips against hers. But it was days like this, when it was different, when Sarah would lean into her and kiss her like she didn't know anything else in the world besides Telly. And that's exactly what Sarah was doing right now, 3 weeks after their first kiss, as she pressed Telly into the couch beneath them, rocking her hips into Telly's as the young witch was laid out beneath her, hands clutching at Sarah's back. Sarah's lips trailed down from Telly's mouth to her jaw, nipping slightly and earning a gasp before she pressed a kiss to the same spot, slowly making her way down Telly's neck. She nuzzled into Telly's neck before kissing it again, feeling Telly suck in a deep breath underneath her. Sarah squeezed her hand that was holding onto Telly's hip, feeling Telly's leg hook up over her waist. She pulled back slightly, catching her breath, and she watched Telly's eyes flutter open beneath her. "We can stop whenever you want, okay?" she breathed out. Telly almost laughed at that, the thought of Sarah stopping what she was doing right now seeming absolutely ridiculous to her. But a pang of affection went through her chest at Sarah's words anyway. She didn't know what it was, whether it was a byproduct of Sarah's upbringing, if she was afraid of scaring Telly off again, or if it was simply part of who Sarah was as a person. But it had taken Telly almost a week to convince Sarah that she didn't need to ask for permission every time she wanted to kiss her. She had gotten good about it, taking Telly by surprise with sweet and gentle kisses that left Telly blushing and swooning. But when it came to anything more than that, she was still cautious with Telly, taking great care to let Telly know that they could stop at any time, always giving Telly an out if she wanted. "So, never then?" Telly couldn't stop the slightly delirious laugh that found its way out of her throat. It was quickly replaced by a sharp gasp as Sarah's eyes darkened, and she leaned back down to press open-mouthed kisses against Telly's neck. Teeth scraped over sensitive skin, followed by Sarah's lips, soothing and sucking at the same area. Telly's breathing grew more erratic as Sarah paid careful attention to each spot on Telly's neck that got a reaction out of her. Once she found a new spot, she would spend the next few minutes there, slowly leaving a trail of kisses down Telly's neck. Sarah nipped at a particularly sensitive spot near Telly's collarbone, earning a breathy moan from the woman beneath her. She grinned to herself and repeated the action more slowly, following it up with a slow drag of her tongue along the same spot. Telly let out a stuttering breath from beneath her, one that sounded suspiciously like Sarah's own name, and her hand shifted from where it had been clutched at Sarah's shoulder to bravely reach down and grab Sarah's ass, squeezing. It was Sarah's turn to gasp, only partly from surprise, and she lifted her head up, giving a slow, purposeful roll of her hips against Telly's. "Sarah," Telly did moan Sarah's name that time, sending a rush of arousal through her. "I'm right here, darling," Sarah whispered, leaning down to press another firm kiss to Telly's lips. She felt Telly rock up into her again, and her hand slid underneath Telly's shirt, nails scraping gently over her soft stomach. Her hand had no more than started to slide up, gliding gently over Telly's ribs, when a sound that had become Sarah's least favorite sound over the past few weeks echoed throughout the room. She felt Telly stiffen beneath her at the sound of the alarm clock, and Sarah reluctantly pulled away from kissing Telly, a slight growl rising in her throat as she dropped her head to Telly's shoulder. "You've gotta be fucking joking," she murmured into Telly's skin. She felt Telly stroke her back. "I could stay." The words weren't offered up as a question, but Sarah knew Telly was asking anyway. She knew Telly would gladly skip her next class, all of her classes, to spend time with her. It was a fact that charmed Sarah and warmed her heart. But it was also one that meant that Sarah had to be the one to push Telly to leave when the time came, to force them to say goodbye, no matter how badly she wanted Telly to stay. Sarah lifted her head to look at Telly, and when her eyes met Telly's soft brown ones, her resolve almost broke. But she sighed and slowly rolled off of Telly into a standing position as she shook her head. No. She offered her hand to Telly, who took it, and helped her to her feet. She pressed a kiss to Telly's cheek before walking over and turning off the alarm. "You need to go to class. I don't want you to get into any trouble because of me." Telly's arms slid around Sarah from behind, and she buried her face into Sarah's back. "You're worth getting into a little trouble for." Sarah laughed at that, turning around to take Telly's head in her hands. "Go." She pressed a kiss to Telly's lips. "To." She kissed her again. "Class." She punctuated her point with a nip to Telly's lower lip. Telly swooned slightly at the sensation before her eyes fluttered open, looking disappointed, yet unsurprised. "Fine," she grumbled, "but I'll be back tomorrow." She kissed Sarah on the corner of her mouth before stepping out of her embrace, starting for the door. Sarah stepped after her. "Telly." She was suddenly nervous. Telly immediately turned back around. "What is it?" Sarah stared at Telly for a few moments. "Come back tonight." Telly's eyes widened, not quite believing her ears. "What?" Sarah felt her face heat up, and she did her best to ignore it. "If you want to, I mean. If you're even able to. You can come back tonight." Telly looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. "And I could stay?" "Yes." Telly's eyes lit up in wonder, and she was suddenly running towards Sarah, throwing herself into her arms. Sarah caught her effortlessly, keeping them both upright as Telly kissed her, breathless and excited, hands twisting into Sarah's shirt. She pulled back just as suddenly, her eyes still sparkling as she smiled up at Sarah in a way that caused butterflies to erupt in her stomach. "Then yes," she breathed out. "Yes, I'll come back tonight." "General Bellwether, may I have a word?" Petra barely lifted her eyes from the report that she was reading, looking up just long enough to see who had spoken. It was a soldier she didn't recognize, bearing the medals of a lieutenant, standing before her desk. "What is it, Lieutenant?" she asked, turning back to her report. "I have a report regarding a spree cell in Redmond." Petra's pen froze above her paper. She set it down, straightening up in her chair to get a better look at the soldier in her office. "In Redmond," she repeated, certain she had misheard. "Yes, ma'am." Petra and the soldier stared at each other for a moment, before Petra stood. "Door," she ordered the soldier, who obediently walked over to close and lock the door to Petra's office. As Petra walked over to the windows and pulled the blinds closed. Once the room was guarded from anyone who might want to look in, Petra turned back around to the soldier who was still standing at attention, staring at Petra, almost like she was waiting for something. "Go ahead," Petra nodded. The lieutenant reached into her pocket, slipping out a lighter, flicking it as she brought it up to her face. Petra watched in fascination as the lieutenant held the lighter under her chin, flames licking upward and burning away the face of the soldier. The fire died down, and the face of Nick de Batan was left in its place, smirking. "Pretty cool, right?" She wiggled the lighter between her thumb and forefinger. "You have a report for me?" Petra ignored her. This wasn't the first time she had heard from Nicte on their conjoined effort to take down the Camarilla. But it was in fact the first time that Nicte had shown up in person to deliver the report. She figured it had to be worthwhile. "Yes, ma'am," Nicta said again, her tone more mocking this time. She looked so out of place in the army uniform, Petra thought, as the woman gazed around her room. Nicta was a good ally, and a formidable one at that, but Petra was still wary of the woman. "Well," Petra was losing her patience, "I assume it must be important if you decided to show up yourself." "Oh." Nicta finally tore her gaze from the bookshelf that lined Petra's wall to actually look at the woman herself. "You'd be right about that." She paused, just long enough for Petra to clench her jaw in frustration. "A few days ago, a couple of my agents who had been sent undercover to the Camarilla were discovered." She wandered over to the bookshelf, her dark eyes raking up and down the shelf, looking at the titles. 3 of them were killed, but 1 of them got away. She turned to look back at Petra. "She made it back to me with 2 very important things." Nicta held up 2 fingers, as if to illustrate her point. "And what would those things be?" Petra asked. "The attack on Fort Salem took more out of them than anyone realized. They don't have the numbers that people believe they do. They are trying to recruit more members, but the army's pinning of the death of the vice president's daughter on the Camarilla was a good move. People are scared to join up because of that. And the other thing?" A slow smile crept onto Nicta's face as she stepped away from the bookshelf, slowly stalking over to Petra. "My agent, who made it back to me?" At Petra's nod, Nicta continued, her smile growing bigger. "She escaped from the same place they use to create the witch plague, their base of operations." "Are you certain?" Petra said harshly. "This isn't something we can afford to be wrong about." "Oh, don't worry, General." Nicta's words should have been reassuring, but they still held a hint of a mocking tone to them. "I made sure of it myself." She tapped herself on the temple. "Can't take any risks on this, you know?" Petra let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She could hardly believe it. Nicta Batan and her army of rebels had managed to discover intel in a few months that her own soldiers hadn't been able to. "Thank you for bringing this to me," she said, trying to make sure she sounded grateful. A serious look passed over Nicta's face. "You saved my life, Bellwether. You gave me a second chance and trusted me when you had no reason to. I wasn't going to betray that." Petra barely had time to respond before the serious look was gone, and the air of playfulness that always seemed to surround Nicta returned. "And besides, it's been fun hunting down the Camarilla. And you have certainly proven more useful than my soldiers," Petra admitted with a sigh. "Without you, I'm afraid we'd still be in the dark on this." "You're welcome," came the snide retort. "So, what are we going to do about this? And also," the voice turned curious, "where are you going to tell everyone you got this info from?" "An anonymous source," Petra replied swiftly. Nicta looked like she wanted to laugh at that, but didn't. "And your plan of action? It does include me, yes?" "Yes," Petra sighed. It was a risk, working with Nicta, but it had proven far more useful than she ever could have hoped. If we want to take down this base and destroy their only way of making the witch plague, then we need to move fast and quietly. "I can have a team ready by tonight." Nicta's answer surprised Petra, and she didn't bother to hide it. "What?" Nicta shrugged. "The Camarilla is the real threat right now, not the army." She winked at Petra. Petra regarded Nicta carefully, and something clicked in her brain. "They don't know." Nicta's cocky smile disappeared. "What?" "That you're reporting to me. Your agents don't know that, do they?" Petra almost laughed. "Can you blame me?" Nicta said tightly. Half Hell, most of them still resent the army and the forced conscription. They won't rest until the accords are broken, but for right now, they are content with hunting the Camarilla. And when the Camarilla is no longer a threat? Petra asked softly. Will you be my enemy so quickly again? An uncomfortable look crossed Nicta's face, and she shifted in place where she stood. I think it would be better for us to plan on our next course of action. The two women stared at each other for a moment, before Petra sighed again. You're right. There are more important things. She sat back down in her chair, motioning for Nicta to do the same. Nicta sat easily, leaning back in her chair and propping up a booted foot on Petra's desk. Petra arched an eyebrow at her, but didn't say anything about it. So, you can have a team ready by tonight. Yes, ma'am. Nicta's voice, for once, lacked its mocking tone as she answered Petra. Petra nodded, looking deep in thought. Do you think you could get them to cooperate? Nicta scoffed. We're no military unit, but they work together just fine. I meant with a strike team. Nicta's eyes widened, and she let out a sputtering laugh. You're joking! She dropped her foot from Petra's desk and leaned forward in shock as she took in Petra's serious expression. You're not joking. I think it's our best chance, Petra said seriously. I have no doubt that your spree agents will do well enough, but I want the army in on this, and with the assistance of a strike team. Absolutely not, Nicta protested wildly. They would tear each other apart before the mission even starts. Sergeant Batan. Do not, Nicta snarled, her whole demeanor changing in the blink of an eye. She stood so suddenly and so violently at Petra's words that she knocked over the chair she had been sitting on. We are working together, Petra. I am not one of your soldiers that you can order around, and I am certainly not a sergeant in the U.S. Army anymore. Petra, to her credit, didn't let the other woman's outburst register anything other than slight surprise on her face. Nicta, she conceded, allowing the other woman time to calm down. Nicta huffed a puff of air through her flaring nostrils before leaning down and righting the chair she had knocked over. She threw herself down into it, eyeing Petra warily. Do you honestly think your idea will work? Her tone was curt. That your soldiers will play nice with Spree just because the general told them to? How many agents can you have ready? Petra asked, ignoring Nicta's question. Nicta rolled her eyes. Petra, how many? Petra asked again, her tone firmer this time. 12. Petra nodded slowly, deep in thought. Good. She looked back up to Nicta, who was looking at her curiously. Get your agents to play nice. Whatever you have to do, I don't care. I want the army in on this mission, and I have 3 soldiers to assist you, who won't give a damn about helping you or the Spree. For the first time since Nicta stepped into her office, the woman was at a loss for words as she stared at Petra. You don't mean... Do you? She asked incredulously, her dark eyes flickering over Petra's face like she would find the answer there. Petra leaned forward, resting her elbows on her desk. Tell me where the Camarilla base is, and everything you know about it. Then tonight I will have my daughter and her unit meet you at a rendezvous point, and you can take down that base with everything that you've got. I want it and everyone inside destroyed. Do you understand? Nicta stared at Petra for a moment, almost like she didn't quite believe what she had just said. But then a smile crawled over her face, and she nodded, sitting up in her seat. Understood. Now, let's talk.
please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.